The broadcast is live. All right. Hey, Rich, it's good to see you. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Joe. What a beautiful spring day we got going, huh?
Isn't it? Yeah, sunshine, nice temperatures. The weekend's supposed to be 80. So, welcome to our viewers. This is an opportunity to talk about all things productivity, all things process improvement, because we got Rich in the room. Let me just dive into a little bit about myself and then give Rich a chance. Joe Waynes with Turtleworks. We cut the learning curve so that you can apply your Microsoft technology to your business problems now instead of waiting to figure out how. Rich, can you give me 30 words on what it is the Luminous Group does?
Sure. We work with business leaders that are looking to improve productivity or quality in their manufacturing or business processes.
Sweet. So I've known Rich a little while, and I thought he would be a great guest to invite on to talk about productivity and process improvement because that's what he does all day. And we're hoping to give you a couple things that you can take away, try on your own, see if they work. If you need, you bump your head, you certainly could reach out to Rich. We'll give you contact info at the end. Also, if you got any questions while we're doing this conversation, feel free to enter them in the chat window, and we've got Kendra monitoring them, and she'll intervene as necessary so that we can address those questions. So, Rich, I always like to start out with, if you need to engage a C-level, you start with a question. So you walk in the room. What is the question or set of questions that you would ask a C-level to get them engaged about this whole idea of process improvement and productivity?
Well, Joe, it's an interesting question, and it really it's a great day since it's a Monday to be sort of asking that question because we're all starting the new week here, and yet sometimes we feel like we're 2 or 3 days behind even on Monday. But that pain point that the Luminous Group likes to look for or likes to talk with people about really focuses on, are they prepared? Have they set themselves up for success? And what are they doing to be successful? Because success isn't an accident. Okay, it's something that we plan for. It's something that we do a lot of preparation for. And if we aren't doing that, then people aren't successful. So the first question that we really want to talk to people about is, what in your organization are you doing to be successful in your process?
Hmm. Okay. And what do you get? What do you get as an answer?
A lot of the times what we get is, well, we have all these standards. And they start pulling books off of shelves, and they start bringing up flow charts, and they have all these standards and all these, and we start to ask them, well, what do you do with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how do you know if people are following those standards? How do you know if those standards are effective? How do you know if people even know about those standards? And so to answer your question, we oftentimes we have a lot of stuff that we've done, but we're not following it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So first of all, in my mind, I've learned that if I have something I'm doing regularly, I write it down as a process, which isn't
Yeah.
maybe the same thing as a standard, but I think it's close. It's like if I write it down, then I know how to do it again,
Mhm.
and I can update that as things improve, as I figure out better ways to do it. So for me, it's like a SharePoint starter kit, or I need to do a discovery. I have the recipe to do that. I have that. I don't know if it's a checklist or a standard or whatever, but I have that, and it certainly is useful. And I too have to work with myself and work with my guys to remember it's there. Use it.
And you mentioned one of the best tools, that whether it's a C-level person or whether it's a supervisor, on a manufacturing floor, one of the best tools is a checklist.
Hmm.
Okay, and we really, you get on an airplane, and if you look in the cockpit, what are the pilots doing? They're going through a checklist. They're going through that pre-flight. Okay,
Hmm.
well, I sure want them to do that pre-flight and not in flight. Okay. And so, it sounds like a joke, but are you doing your pre-flight? It's
Hmm.
Monday. Are you doing your pre-flight for the week? Okay.
Right.
Have you done your pre-flight? Are you ready to go for that week? And that's that, term, setting yourself up for success.
Hmm.
And I love the way you referenced it, Joe. You know, I have it. Will I use it?
Hmm.
Okay. Because that's the other big problem that we get into
Right.
is, man, we've got all these things at our disposal and then nobody uses them.
Hmm. One of the things we talked about a while back was, how do I know if I'm going to have a good day?
Hmm.
Right. And I think that checklist is a way for you to at least get off on the right foot.
Yep.
Right. There's a lot of stuff that could be on that checklist. If there's 25 items on that checklist, you can't do that in your head. You
No.
just can't. So if you've got those 25 items checked off, you sort of, I did it. It's all taken care of. If there were issues, you can certainly address those issues at that time. And frankly, I can't walk down the street without a checklist. If I'm going on vacation, I got this, I'm camping, whatever it is, I've got to have a checklist, and then I have peace of mind.
And Joe, we have so many great tools at our disposal now. Okay. I happen to be a fan of OneNote, and I have my checklists in OneNote.
Hmm.
Okay. But Lee Iacocca was using checklists, when he was chairman of Chrysler back in the 80s. Okay. And I don't think he had OneNote back then.
No,
Okay.
it's not a new idea, but it's a great idea. And I love you talking about OneNote because I drank that Kool-Aid 6 years ago. I haven't had a notepad on my desk in 6 years, literally.
Yeah.
And there's great ways to do checklists there. We also use a Microsoft Planner for some checklists. There's some other options as well in the Microsoft world for doing that.
Mhm.
But OneNote works really well.
Yeah. And once again, one of the things that I want to emphasize here, and it goes back to that kind of basic point where you started, is it's not sophisticated. As a matter of fact, when I'm sort of judging my week, and I try every Sunday night to review my checklist for the coming up week, I can kind of tell where I'm going to be at, and that number for me happens to be 10. If the items on my list are 10 or below, I'm probably well prepared for the week and I'm in a good position to be successful. If that list is 10 to 20, it's going to be a tough week. I'm probably, not going to, be very happy. And if it's over 20, I really have to reevaluate and I got to look at, am I going to delegate some of this? Am I going to, literally
Sure.
start calling people and putting things off? Because beyond 20, man,
Hmm.
I'm swamped. I'm just overwhelmed.
Right. I'm thinking, like, if on your checklist, if I know I'm going to have a good day because I've got the material I need in place, I've got the labor that I need, and I don't know what else would be on that checklist, but at least those two items right there really set peace of mind. It's sort of like when you're baking something, right? You set out all the ingredients first, at least we do.
Mhm.
Um, to make sure we got what we need before we start cooking. Because if we don't, we're gonna have a surprise we don't like. If we're making cookies and we don't have chocolate chips, and we're making chocolate chip cookies, you got a problem. So,
Yeah,
um,
and
so
Joe, I appreciate you giving me that that straight man lead in because since I'm doing a broadcast with TurtleWorks, I figured I'd bring another tool that I happen to really like. And this is another one of these tools. This is not new. Okay. This goes back, I believe, all the way back into the 50s. A consulting company created this, and it's a turtle diagram. Okay. And it's not a turtle diagram because I'm with TurtleWorks. This is a turtle diagram. And I happen to, when I show this diagram, I talk about baking cookies because everyone can relate to it. And there are lots of inputs that can make us successful in a week. And some people, look at this and they remember fishbone diagrams or Ishikawa diagrams. But I happen to think this is sort of the easiest way for me to think about this. And you mentioned putting out your ingredients, your flour, brown sugar, eggs, salt. I got news for you. If you're missing any one of them, they ain't going to be good cookies.
mhm.
And it's the same thing. If you've got the recipe for peanut butter cookies and you want to make chocolate chip cookies, you aren't going to be successful. And so, we can look at all these different inputs, whether it's the materials, the method, the machines that we have to use, the bowls, ovens, all those kinds of things. And lastly, believe it or not, is when you start looking at the people. Okay. And do you have the labor, and do you have the skill set, and do you have the training and all that type of thing? But you need all those inputs if you're going to be successful. And for each one of those items on my list, I actually usually then break that down and look at what are the things that I need in order to get that task done. And I use this turtle diagram in, once again, in OneNote. I actually have this, where I can just paste it in. And I use this right in OneNote again to make sure I have everything I need for those tasks that I want to get done for the week.
So on one hand, I look at this diagram and I think, okay, I'm in the kitchen making cookies. And then I can also look at this diagram and say, let's look at this at scale. Let's pretend we're Keebler or Archway, and we need to make chocolate chip cookies. And we have to figure out, how do we make sure that there's N number of chocolate chips in every cookie? What are the other things that we need to pay attention to from a quality perspective? And how do we get from the inputs to the perfect chocolate chip cookie every time? Is that where standards comes in?
That's where standards come in, Joe. That's exactly right. Okay. Look, what is the standard for chocolate chips? Is it 5 plus or minus 1? Is it 7 plus or minus 2? What is that standard? And it's the same thing. If I have measuring cups and I need to measure a third of a cup, but the graduations are in quarter cups, I don't know if I'm really going to get a third of a cup every time. Okay. I need something that can measure a third of a cup. So I got to make sure I have the right tool available, particularly if I'm somebody like Keebler, where you don't want operators making estimates or making judgment calls. You want a repeatable process. And so that's where those standards come in place. And we have to ask ourselves, do we have the standards that we need? Are our people following the standards? And are the standards effective? If our marketing department has told us that people want at least 10 chocolate chips and our standard is 6 plus or minus 1, we're never going to really meet the customer's satisfaction level.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. So the checklist gets us off. The standards gets us to the place where it's repeatable and we have good ingredients going in and good stuff coming out. You sort of made a joke about there's 3 kinds of standards: the invisible standard, the effective standard, and the ones that aren't being followed.
Yeah. Although before we even get there, Joe, I want to say something about that. And the checklist tells us what we want to do. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of that orange input box. It says that we want to make chocolate chip cookies. Okay. And the standard tells us how we're supposed to do it. But the thing that we find in industry right now, and the most common problem that people have, is that the standards aren't followed. Okay. And so the question is, how do you as an organization ensure that your standards are actually being used, and that if we're supposed to get 6 plus or minus 1 chocolate chips, that we're not getting 10 chocolate chips, which costs us extra money, or we're getting 3 chocolate chips that doesn't meet our need. And that's that pain point that a lot of those executives that we started this discussion out with really come back to is, I've got work instructions out there. I'm telling the people how to do this, and they're not doing it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Or I have the measuring cup out there and they're not measuring, they're just dumping the stuff in. I told them, I gave them the tool. How do we actually get past that? Okay. And that brings us sort of to another important tool. And this one's less well known, but it's something that's called a layered process audit. Mm-hmm. And it goes by LPA. Okay. And it helps us ask this question: is the standard defined? Okay. And what we're asking about there is, you may have a speed limit sign, but what's the speed limit, Joe?
For me, it's 5 miles over whatever's posted.
But worse, what if nothing's posted?
Yeah, depends on my mood and what's going on in traffic. Yeah,
exactly. Or, you got a speed limit, and I know one particular stretch of road in the Detroit area, and the speed limit just doesn't match the type of road that it is, the situation, and so it's confusing to people.
Mm.
And that brings up the second one, which is the standard correct? You know, if the speed limit's 4, Joe, do you think you're going to obey it?
I can't drive that slow.
Exactly. Okay. It's just not practical. We're asking our people to do something that they can't do.
Hmm.
Okay. And then lastly is, our Joe Wayne's problem. Okay. You know, regardless of what the speed
Well, wait a
limit
minute.
says.
Wait a minute. Full disclosure, I no longer drive with a radar detector, and I no longer drive 20 miles over the speed limit. Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm a little disappointed. You were funding our city, and no wonder our city's short of money now. Without the Joe Wayne's ticket fund, we don't have anybody to keep us in. But there's the last part, which is that people just there's a standard, but nobody's following it. Okay, everybody went out and they bought their Mustangs, or they bought their Dodge Chargers or whatever, and nobody's following that standard. And when people aren't following that standard, it really creates a cultural problem within an organization. And by the way, that cultural problem can be how to process checks at a bank. It can be how to fulfill drive-through orders at a fast food restaurant, or it can be how to make axles at an automotive supplier. It doesn't matter. When your people aren't following the standard, or they're picking and choosing which standard to follow, it creates huge problems, and it creates a culture where there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of blaming, and generally a lot of variation in the product.
Mhm. So this layered process audit handles this somehow. How?
Well, it brings together that idea of checklists, and it brings together the idea of the inputs that we saw in the turtle diagram, and it brings together accountability. So we make a checklist. Usually it's 10 questions, and we go out to the workplace, whether it's the drive-through restaurant or the drive-through preparation at a restaurant, whether it's the tellers working at a bank, or whether it's the manufacturing line in a manufacturing plant, and we ask 10 questions. We check 10 things that are inputs to the process, and we check to see, are people following that? Are they using that measuring cup that we talked about? Are they putting the right number of chocolate chips in? And we check those inputs. And if we check those 10 inputs and all 10 are where they're supposed to be, odds are we're going to have a good day, Joe. On the other hand, if 6 of them are right but 4 are wrong, we're not going to have a good day.
Hmm.
Okay. And the fact is, though, that by doing the layered process audit, we find that, and we find it quickly, and we find it at the input level, not the output level, not after we've made the bad parts or
Oh, good
given the
point.
person, the bad drive through order. We find it at the input level. And so it's a proactive, preventive measure.
Sure. Companies don't make money making scrap.
Now, and even worse, companies don't make money inspecting parts. Okay.
It's true.
And so I recently was at a drive-through, and I watch these things because I've actually worked with companies on this. And the person filled the bag, handed the bag to another person who looked in the bag, who handed the bag to another person who handed it to me.
Hmm.
Can you make money with that many people handing off and not adding value to your process?
Yeah, right.
Okay. So we need a tool like layered process audits, which gets everybody from the supervisor to the top level of management at a site involved. And everybody goes out and they ask questions. And I'll throw out my one Japanese language lesson for today, and that term is Gemba. And Gemba means action. Go where the action is. And that may be, if you're making axles, go to the assembly line. And if you're handling canceled checks, go out to the tellers and see how the tellers are handling their checks. But go to the action and ask questions about those inputs. And by doing that, you can proactively influence how your process is working.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm trying to recall. I had a conversation last week, and the Japanese were brought up, and it was again the very same thing. Like, go look,
Yeah,
go look at what's going on.
exactly. And Joe, it's one of those things. In some of the projects that you and I have worked together on, when we're looking at the process, the first thing that I want people to do is actually go see the process. I don't care if someone hands you a flow chart or something like that. Man, that might be a flow chart from last year. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that's what's happening, today. Okay, go see.
Yep,
You know,
absolutely. Like, we do this discovery thing that is very much that we find out what their pain points are and what their vision are from an IT perspective, and then we interview, we observe, we flow chart. We do the work to figure out what it is that you're actually doing, as opposed to taking some piece of paper that you gave us, because they're usually stale.
yeah. Joe, I'll tell a quick story here, but there was a automotive supplier that was struggling, and so they asked the Luminous group to come in, and they sat us down in a conference room, and they were telling us all this stuff and everything, and basically they had two assembly lines doing the exact same thing, making the same product, but to meet the demand, they had two identical assembly lines, and they kept stressing to us how identical they were. And we were listening and nodding our heads and all that kind of stuff. And finally we said, well, let's go out and look at these lines so we can understand what was going on. And when we went out and we looked, it was so evident, just even by looking at the number of people and where they were standing, these weren't identical lines. Their
Hmm.
processes had just veered apart. And the first thing that we helped them with was to get back to the standard so that the two lines were running identically. And
Okay.
then we could start to work on machine capabilities and process studies and designs of experiments and all these fancy words that everybody wants to throw around. But the first thing was we had to get them back to the standard, and from
Hmm.
there we could make progress.
Okay. We touched earlier. I think last week or the week before, we were talking about problem solving. Is there anything you wanted to bring up about that, or?
Well, that's why I was sort of transitioning into this. The first step, whether it's problem solving or whether it's continuous improvement, the first step in that goes back to our standards. Okay?
Hmm.
If people aren't following the standards, then you have no baseline to work from. And so our first piece of advice to every company that we work with is let's get back to standard. Okay, let's make sure the machine runs the way that it's supposed to, that it's had all of its preventive maintenance. Let's make sure all the tools that people are supposed to be using are available and readily there. Let's make sure the instructions are there and that the people have been trained. Let's make sure that they have all the material that they're supposed to have, whether it's nuts and bolts and screws or whether it's chocolate chips and flour and eggs. Let's get back to that standard. And we can then build from that standard and start to see where the problem is. But if you're just working in chaos, Joe, there's really no way to do problem solving or continuous improvement.
I'm guessing you don't walk into organizations that don't have standards these days and don't have checklists. Is that true? I'm thinking back to some small manufacturing that I was involved with when I was a kid, and just like trying to compare that to what it is you're probably facing. Do you ever, like, you guys don't have standards? Do you ever encounter that?
We do. We still do. And here's the scary part. One of the areas where we encounter that is at the cutting edge of technology. So when we go into some of the new technology companies that are now entering into the transportation field, some of those companies, they aren't coming from, I'll say, a process orientation. They're coming from an innovation and design side. And so they aren't really focused on how do we set up a well understood manufacturing process. And so yeah, we still do that. We still see that. However, to kind of support what you're saying, that's the 20% problem, Joe. The
Mhm.
80% problem is the standards exist and people aren't following them.
Okay.
Okay. It's the people who say we've got two identical assembly lines, but they aren't identical. Okay. That's the 80%
Mhm.
problem. So
Okay. Let me see. I think we've covered it all. I don't know if there's something else you wanted to talk about. Feel free to chime in.
No, the one last thing that I'll mention is Peter Drucker used to have a saying that culture will eat strategy for lunch. And you really have to think about this stuff as a culture type of situation. Do we have a culture where people know what they're doing and are prepared for the week? Do we have a culture where we understand our process and we control the inputs? Do we have a culture where we reinforce that and we listen to our employees? Do we have a culture where we don't point fingers and blame, but we problem solve and move forward? And so, as much as we can talk about each of these individual tools, I would like to circle this back to, it is about that C-suite setting up a culture of communication and support for their people.
Perfect. All right. So if people need to get a hold of Rich, they can do so by this.
By this,
So Richard at the luminousgroup.com, and there's his phone number and the
yeah,
website.
yeah.
And if people need to get a hold of me, they can do so here. Always interested in talking to people about Microsoft 365. You can get 15 minutes of my day anytime to talk about something that's useful. There's a link that'll actually let you see my calendar and book something with me. Um, think we're set. So thanks
Well,
for your
yeah,
time, Rich. I appreciate it. This was fun.
yeah.
Um, yeah. Thanks
Thank you,
for.
Joe. And
Okay.
one thing that I'll plug for both of us is look for both of us on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
That's another way to see us and follow us. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thanks now. Bye,
thank you,
everyone.
Joe. Bye bye.